All right, on page 91, there was a fairly lengthy discussion of what was expected of the leadership in the church with regard to idolatry. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, but we could have spent some time in Ezekiel chapter 34, where God condemns the shepherds who, through their apathy, through their indifference, which is the same thing, but almost a gross negligence, allowed God's people to become prey for those that would seek to turn them from what we might refer to as the straight and narrow way. And so we're going to look on page 91, and looking at the matter of guarding our reverence, again in a little bit different sense, but in the second paragraph, and again speaking to Exodus 32 and the golden calf incident, it says, "It was this deadly apathy that destroyed Israel. The people became unconcerned and insensitive to the presence of evil idolatry. And the Lord's church is often the unsuspecting victim, as members are content to drift along, resting in the false assurance that all things are going well." And that is a very insightful comment. That as long as we feel like, as long as there is no, for lack of a better term, hot war being fought, as long as there is peace, as long as there is relative harmony, that everything is just rocking along and everything is well. But that is rarely, if ever, the case, because while the church at large may be at peace, we understand that the church is comprised of individuals, and that individuals struggle from day to day. And oftentimes, as a matter of fact, rarely ever will those struggles manifest themselves in the confines of the four walls of this building. And what ends up happening is that based on these struggles, or based on the development of apathy and indifference, people will eventually just drift away. The Hebrews writer said, "We must give the more earnest heed to those things which we have heard, lest at any time we let them slip or drift away." And there's always a danger that we as individuals can drift. I was just thinking, even thinking about this lesson, when we started back full bore with all of our classes, all of our services, and all of our classes. Now, granted, a lot of our numbers early on were boosted by we had a really good run of visitors and children, and that's good. But as we moved on, as those visitors and whatnot, didn't return for whatever reason. It wasn't because they weren't contacted. I mean, we sent cards and made calls and contact, but I guess in a way, as the new began to wear off, our numbers began to suffer. And if you were just to go back and look, for example, look at our Sunday night numbers compared to our Sunday morning numbers. Less than half. Now, when we were having a lot of visitors on Sunday morning, there was a reason why our Sunday night numbers weren't as good as our Sunday morning numbers, because visitors rarely ever come back on Sunday night. They're going to come on Sunday morning. But that's not been the case, in the last, let's say, 3 or 4 months. Our numbers on Sunday night, like I said, are less than half of what they are on any given Sunday morning. And on top of that, the ones that are not coming back are not the old folks who are afraid to drive at night. It's if you were to take a survey or just a visual survey of the crowd on Sunday night, It's not the old people that are missing. It's the young people that are missing. It's parents that are missing, and there's two, 1, 2, 3, 4 kids or whatever that are not here, and it makes a huge hole in our attendance. And so why is it that our young families don't see the need to come back on Sunday night? Because I'm just thinking about. Maybe they don't want to wrestle their kids or whatever, but, my mom was a single mom for the most part all of my life. And I never, my mom dragged 2 kids to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, gospel meetings too. Rhonda and I, I've always had a lot of responsibilities since, I started either preaching or I was a youth minister and I was a song leader and there was I had a lot of responsibilities, and Rhonda was basically on her own with 2 small children for a long time in the assembly, and I guess my point is that for decades or over 100 years, young families managed to get their kids to church on Sunday night, but that's not the case anymore. And it's not the older folks. It's not the older folks who are absent. It's the younger folks. And I don't know what the solution is. I mean, I can't make them love the Lord. I can't make folks love the Lord enough to come on Sunday night. But we've been doing some things on Sunday night for about 4 or 5 years that I think have been really helpful. I know they've been helpful for me. The questions and answers and the study of denominational doctrines. And, if a person had been here every Sunday night for the last 4 or 5 years, they ought to have a pretty good grasp of the denominational errors and a lot of the things that we would have to deal with on a daily basis. But, when folks are not here, they don't learn those things. And so, it's a deadly apathy. It's a deadly apathy that people get in this idea that as long as I can get my Sunday morning box checked, I'm good to go. Our Wednesday night, and one reason I'm kind of picking on the young families is, first of all, they're the ones that are absent the most. But secondly, our Wednesday night numbers are better than our Sunday night numbers, and I'm guessing it's just because we have Bible class. But because there's no Bible class on Sunday night, then we're not going to bring them, and we're not going to wrestle them, for 45 or 50 minutes or whatever. But and I don't know how to. I don't know how I can make people love the Lord enough to want to come back. But it's a problem, and those are the types of things that lead to people drifting away. And so and I think the word is right. It is a deadly apathy. All right, over on page 92, moving out of the introduction into the body of the lesson of God's expectations of His people when idolatry is present. And it says, what do you do? And by the way, this is not. You have to remember something. This is something that was written by John that is the result of 50 years of working basically with larger congregations. All right, John was the preacher at Southside in St. Louis when Rhonda was little. They had about 400. They had about 400 members, and he was the preacher in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, through the 80s and the 90s, and that was a sizable congregation of maybe 200 or 300 at least. So in other words, he's got a perspective that is really not indicative of our experience. Okay, because I've got an idea that if things were to start going sideways at some point here by me or by some other individual, that matter would be dealt with. It'd be dealt with immediately. And so that's what, but when you run into larger congregations, just like I was telling you about my home congregation, where the elders were, just hands off on a group of people that were seeking to introduce unscriptural practices and doctrines, in the church. And they just left those people alone, I guess, hoping that, they wouldn't, maybe hoping they'd go away or something. But, and so the point is, this perspective is a little bit different. Well, it's considerably different than what we would experience in a small, tight-knit group, as opposed to some of the larger congregations, which is essentially where almost all of the false doctrines come out of the large congregations. And then those congregations are influential to others. There's a congregation in Dallas, Texas. They claim to have about 4,000 or 5,000 members, and they introduced instrumental music into the worship. Well, very, very few congregations in Dallas followed that lead. The problem is that of those 4,000 or 5,000 people in the outlying congregations all have connections to that church. They have family members that go to that church. And so when that type of thing happens, the people that are in the outlying areas, they may not embrace it, but their attitude toward it might be different. Because now my family member, I've got a brother, I've got a child, I've got a parent, I've got a grandparent, and they're a member there, and I'm not going to be as vocal as I might be otherwise, because now I've got some connection to that church. And a lot of this, Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, Huntsville, some of the bigger congregations in the state of Alabama, they don't exert the type of influence maybe that others do, but there is a residual effect of their apostasy. And so, what are God's expectations of His people when idolatry is present? It says, what do you do if you witness people redesigning God's commands so the commands are more exhilarating or more meaningful? Do you sit mumbling your objections in whispered tones? It says, this is not the response God expects His people to demonstrate. But I got to thinking about that, because every situation is just that. It is situational. In other words, the way that this point comes across, I don't think is what John intended, in that there is a pattern for dealing with various types of errors. I'll give you an example. Well, I'll give you two examples. And by the way, he's going to mention this example at the very end of the lesson. In the Numbers chapter 25, you have an account where the children of Israel have been seduced into idolatry and fornication because Balaam had given Barak instructions on how to cast a stumbling block before the people of God. Balaam would not prophesy against the people because he said, I'll say what God says. But behind the scenes, he was telling Barak how to undermine the children of Israel. And that was through idolatry, which had associated fornication, etc. And so you have a situation where this Israelite man walks in with a Canaanite woman and carries her into his tent. And it's the old saying goes, in front of God and everybody. Not even trying to hide his open rebellion to the command of God. Not only open rebellion in joining himself to a Canaanite woman, but what he intended to do when he got in that tent. And then Phinehas, in a matter of righteous indignation, goes into that tent and kills both of those people. And God says, because Phinehas has been zealous for me and my commands, says it saved a whole bunch of people's lives today. Because if y'all had stood here and done nothing and just sit here and watched it and act like you didn't see it, God would have broke out against them. Which, by the way, He had already done, for example, in the incident of the golden calf, in the incident of the fiery serpents. You see, there was a lot of times where nobody spoke up, and literally thousands of people lost their lives. And so Phinehas is commended for taking bold, decisive, and by the way, not only bold and decisive, but really, I don't even know the word to describe it, definitive action about this matter. So there are times when we have to stand up like Phinehas. In other words, the rebellion is open, it's brazen, it flies right in the teeth of what is good and right, and those things have to be dealt with immediately, and decisively. But then there are other cases, like in Acts 18, where here comes Apollos. He comes to the city of Ephesus. And the Bible describes Apollos as a man who is eloquent and mighty in the Scriptures. But his knowledge is limited to the baptism of John. Notice, and by the way, we're years down the road, okay? We're years down the road from Pentecost. But apparently Apollos had been out preaching the baptism of John all over Asia, particularly among the Jewish people. And here we are years down the road, and Apollos still doesn't know that Jesus has come. So he's still preaching the baptism of John. He gets to Ephesus, where the gospel's already been preached, and there are already Christians there. And then he starts preaching, and he starts preaching about the baptism of John. And the Bible says that when he did that, Aquila and Priscilla took him aside privately and taught him the way of God more accurately. And he was corrected in private. He accepted that correction. And then those very same Christians sent him on into Achaia and Corinth. In other words, they were convinced Apollos was going to do a great work. He accepted that correction and he went on. But sometimes if you end up in a situation like that, somebody wants to kick up a fuss and make a scene about it. And I'm not going to give any particular examples, but I know of a number of examples in my experience where someone innocently did something that was, for lack of a better term, non-standard. Okay, non-standard. In other words, not according to tradition, and it may have even been not according to the Scriptures, but it was innocent in the fact that the individual was kind of in a bad spot and didn't know what to do, and so they just did the best that they could. And somebody wants to stand up in a big crowd and call this person out, and basically call on them to repent for their error when the entire thing was innocent. Notice, there was no intent to disobey God. What should have been done in that case is that somebody, and particularly the one that wanted to create a fuss, should have just carried him aside and said, look, this is not right. But and so next time next time you'll know. And then the matter be settled, right? I mean, assuming that everything that I've described is accurate, that the individual just made an honest mistake, then the matter is settled, and no one is worse for wear. But when somebody wants to stand up in a situation like that and start hollering and shouting, it just creates a lot of disunity. It creates a lot of anxiety. It can create division. It can give. For example, if there are visitors there, it can give them the wrong impression of how the church is supposed to operate. And so we want to make sure that when there is something wrong going on, we want to determine as best we can, is this an intentional attempt to circumvent or change the Word of God, or is this an honest mistake? For example, is this an honest mistake by a young person or a young preacher, or an inexperienced preacher? And if it's that, then you deal with it as gently as one possibly can. And so, and I would say even this: both of those situations still require boldness. It's still difficult to correct a person, even even when they do wrong with integrity and and innocence of heart. But every situation is just that. It is situational. All right, now over to page 93. He just, at the bottom of 92, top of 93, he talks about kind of the plan, that there has to be courage, there has to be education, that's teaching, there has to be obedience, and then there has to be leadership that is not complacent or compromising. And so we're going to look at just a few more things here in the lesson today, that God, in other words, to conquer or confront or conquer idolatry, there has to be a holy reverence and not a worldly emotionalism. And that idolatry is all about feelings and emotionalism. All through the course of the Bible, and I think it's an accurate statement, particularly in view of how the Bible describes idolatry. Idolatry was almost always intertwined with some form of sexual immorality. And it was also intertwined with some form of, or some other form of hedonism, which is simply the pursuit of pleasure. The pursuit of pleasure. Whether it be the music that is played. And by the way, there is some of that even in the Bible, that music could be used as a means to manipulate the minds of people. And by the way, there's a lot of that outside of the church situation. There's a lot of that going on in the minds of people today, and particularly our young people. When I was in high school, Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore, started some kind of a group, and man, they were on a rampage against rock music. I mean, they were on the rampage. And by the way, rightfully so. Rightfully so, because a lot of the rock and roll music of the 60s and 70s did contain some subtle, a lot of subtle and some not so subtle messaging. But when you start rolling into the mid 70s, late 70s, and through the 80s, it was just brazenly ungodly. Brazenly ungodly. And then, and now that mindset or that attitude has infected, every single form of music. Believe it or not, there used to be good rap music, so far as the messaging was concerned. A lot of it was just, lighthearted and fun, and now, it extols and promotes every kind of ungodliness that you can think of. And country music has fallen prey as well. There is no popular music form that has not turned into just basically total debauchery. That's just the way that it is. But it's dangerous because it becomes accepted. It becomes accepted, especially in the minds of young people. And I admit that in listening to the music that I listened to in school, it affected the way I thought. I listened to heavy metal and old hard rock, and there's a mindset to that, and the mindset is basically rebellion. Just rebellion against authority, etc. Parents, school, authority, law enforcement, and particularly God's authority, and it does create a mindset, but now there's just all this unbelievable promotion of ungodliness, and they're feeding it into the minds of our children, and I mentioned it. I even mentioned it yesterday, that now TV advertisers are picking, rather than who was the Mouseketeer years ago that got a lot of popular advertising? Was it Annette Funicello? In other words, people that appeared to be wholesome. They selected people who projected a wholesome image in order to promote their products. Now, they're fine. Let's find the guy that's on the fastest track to hell, and let's sign him to represent our product. I mean, Uber Eats advertising. Two of the most ungodly people in the world, Elton John and Little Nas X. You said, what do you say? Why you mention that about Elton John? Well, he said all religion ought to be outlawed, and Christianity in particular, 2010. Just as queer as a $3 bill. Openly. And then you got Little Nas X who's I can't even, look, in mixed company, I cannot even tell you what he has promoted in his videos in the public square. But that's who Uber Eats is going to get to promote their product. Two of the most vile, ungodly people they can find. Or Snoop Dogg. You know, when did Snoop Dogg become an expert on all things? You know, they had him on The Voice, one of the most popular TV shows on television, and he's the music expert. You know, a guy can't even speak in complete sentences. You know, well, you would. I mean, the guy, you know, they talk about what a mastermind he is, and he's like, it's like he's stoned all the time, and he's dumb as a box of rocks. What? What's that? Yeah, something like that. And then there's something. Then I saw last night Popeyes had some so-called black female rapper, and I don't even know her name. Megan something. She got 3 names. Megan something, I think is right. You know, and she's just about as skanky a thing you've ever seen in your life. I mean, it's just. Notice, the most vile people you can find are the people that they're choosing. By the way, Snoop Dogg is going to be the halftime entertainment at the Super Bowl. All right, you know. Now, in football, now consider this: in National League football, just the accusation of domestic violence will get you kicked out of the league for half a year. Just the accusation will get you kicked out of the league for half a year, even if you're not convicted. You know. There is not a more misogynistic, woman-hating person on the planet than Snoop Dogg. And yet, the NFL is going to kick some dude out supposedly for slapping his girlfriend, but Snoop Dogg's going to represent their brand to more than 1 billion people on Super Bowl Sunday. I mean, you know, the hypocrisy is staggering. But this is the type of imagery that is being fed into the minds of our young people. And even in our own minds, look, even old people are not immune to this, all right? And I consider myself old people, all right? I'm old people. You know, we're not immune from this. And so, you know, the attitudes of idolatry are being steadily fed to us